Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're stepping way back in time to explore one of Germany's most chilling, baffling, and honestly, downright terrifying unsolved cases. We're heading into the rural heart of Bavaria. The year is 1922, to unpack a mystery that has literally haunted investigators for over a century. So if you're fascinated by historical puzzles and the darker side of human psychology, you are definitely in the right place. Let's dive in. Right off the bat, consider this deeply unsettling detail. For 4 whole days after the victims died, smoke just kept rising from their chimney. I mean, let that sink in for a second. 6 people were dead, yet the daily chores of their farm were somehow still being done. The fires were lit, the cattle were fed. This wasn't just a hit-and-run crime. It was an active occupation of a crime scene. To understand how that's even possible, we really need to look at the intense isolation of this Bavarian setting. Section 1. The Isolated Gruber Farm. You see, Hinterkaifeck wasn't a village or even a town. It was a single, isolated farmstead completely swallowed up by woods and open fields. Literally a place where a scream would go completely unheard. 6 people lived on this remote property. Running the show was Andreas Gruber, the 63-year-old stubborn patriarch who very much made his own rules. Then there's his ailing wife, Cecilia. Living with them was their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel. Her husband was presumed killed in World War I. Victoria had 2 kids, 7-year-old Cecilia Jr. and a 2-year-old toddler, Josef. Finally, we have Maria Baumgartner, the 44-year-old new maid. And honestly, what makes her part in this so incredibly tragic is that March 31st, 1922, the day this whole nightmare peaks, was literally her very first day on the job. Section 2. Footprints in the snow. Now, the crazy thing is, this tragedy didn't just happen out of nowhere. In the days and weeks leading up to the murders, the farm was plagued by these super eerie premonitions, but they were completely ignored. For instance, the maid who worked there before Maria actually reported hearing unexplained footsteps up in the attic at night. Then Andreas himself found footprints in the snow. They led straight out of the thick forest, right up to the farmhouse, but there were absolutely no footprints leading back. Someone had walked up to the house and never left. Add to that a mysteriously missing house key. The previous maid was actually so terrified of these unseen presences that she just packed her bags and bolted, totally convinced the place was haunted. But Andreas, stubborn to a fault, he dismissed the whole thing as pure imagination. He didn't bother to search the attic, and he definitely didn't call for help. Section 3. Night of the Murders. March 31st, 1922. So, as the harsh Bavarian winter evening closes in, the sun sets, and the farm plunges into its usual heavy silence. But tonight, that silence is going to be shattered. The killer doesn't just storm the front door. Instead, they wait in the pitch-black barn. The events unfold systematically. First, Andreas heads out to check on the animals. The killer strikes him down with a heavy farming tool known as a mattock. When he doesn't come back, his wife Cecilia goes out looking for him, and she's killed. Then, the widowed daughter Victoria heads to the barn. Exact same fate. Finally, 7-year-old Cecilia follows her family out into the dark. 4 people, systematically lured or ambushed, one by one. We really need to pause here for a second because this detail is just absolutely gut-wrenching. Forensics later proved that little 7-year-old Cecilia didn't die immediately. She survived that initial brutal attack for hours. Lying there in the pitch black of the barn, right next to her family, she was in so much pain that she literally tore out clumps of her own hair. It really drives home the sheer, brutal reality of this crime in a way that just stating the facts simply can't convey. The coldness of the killer's method is just horrifying. Out in the barn, they carefully stacked the 4 bodies right on top of each other and covered them with hay. Then, with completely chilling composure, the killer moves from the barn into the house. They found the brand new maid, Maria, in her bed, killed her, and just pulled a sheet over her body. Finally, they walked into the bedroom and killed 2-year-old Josef right in his crib. 6 lives completely extinguished with one single farm tool. Section 4. The killers stayed behind. Okay, now we reach the most mind-boggling twist of this entire case. After committing 6 brutal murders, the killer didn't just flee into the night. 4. That massive number right there, that represents the 4 days the killer calmly stayed and lived alongside 6 rotting corpses. From March 31st all the way to April 4th, the killer essentially made Hinterkaifeck their home. Think about this. Over those 4 days, they fed the cattle every single day. They lit the stove, cooked themselves meals, and even cut meat from the family's pantry. They tied up the farm dog so it wouldn't bark and draw any attention. They casually flipped on the lights at night, which the neighbors actually saw, but just figured it was the reclusive Grubers going about their usual business. This proves something incredibly vital. The killer was not panicked. They were highly in control and clearly intimately familiar with exactly how to run this specific farm. Section 5. Suspects and ruined evidence. So you might be asking yourself, how does a crime like this go unsolved for a century? Well, it all goes back to the tragic aftermath. The murders happened on March 31st. Since the farm was so isolated, literally no one noticed they were gone until April 4th. But when the neighbors finally went up there to check on them, they didn't just find the bodies. They absolutely wrecked the crime scene. Driven by panic and, let's be honest, morbid curiosity, people trampled all through the barn, moved the hay around, touched the bodies, and even wandered into the kitchen to eat food before the police ever showed up. By the time authorities actually secured the farm, the vital evidence was totally destroyed. Add in the limited forensic tech of 1922, and the trail just grew cold, with the case officially closing in 1955. The police were able to rule out one major motive right away, though: robbery. There were large amounts of cash and expensive jewelry left completely untouched inside the farmhouse. This completely baffled investigators because it proved this wasn't some crime of opportunity or greed. No, this was targeted. It was deeply personal or psychological, and it was executed brutally with the family's own Matic. So who actually did it? Well, there were three primary theories. First up was Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a neighbor who actually led the search party that found the bodies. He knew his way around that house remarkably well, and there were even rumors he had a relationship with Victoria and was the true father of little Joseph. Next suspect? Carl Gabriel, Victoria's husband. He was presumed dead in World War I, but his body was never definitively identified. So did a traumatized soldier return to exact some kind of brutal revenge? Finally, there's the unidentified intruder theory. This perfectly fits the missing key, the noises up in the attic, and those terrifying one-way footprints in the snow. But again, because the crime scene was so badly ruined, neither the police nor historians could definitively prove any of these. As an explainer, we can only report what the sources say, and the sources leave it wide open. Section 6. Questions left unanswered. As we wrap things up here, let's talk about the lingering mysteries that make this case literally impossible to forget. Like, first of all, why on earth did they leave the house one by one? If someone's being attacked out in the barn, wouldn't the others hear them scream? Well, the answer probably lies in the farm's routine. That barn was a separate structure, and it had really thick, heavy walls. Combine that with the loud noises of distressed cattle and the howling winter wind, and it's highly likely any screams were completely drowned out. They weren't knowingly walking into a trap, they were just doing their everyday routine checks. Then there's this awful question. Why did 7-year-old Kazilia go out to the barn? She wasn't an adult doing chores, right? So why was she out there in the freezing dark? We can only speculate, but it's heartbreaking to think she probably just woke up alone in the house, got terrified when she couldn't find her mom or grandparents, and wandered out into the cold barn looking for them, right into the hands of the killer. And honestly, why stay for 4 days instead of fleeing? I really want you to ponder the psychology behind that. To just sit by a fire, cook a hot meal, and feed the dog, fully knowing there's 6 brutally murdered bodies just feet away from you. Did they feel that safe and totally isolated from the outside world? Or were they somehow so deeply attached to the routine of this specific farm that they couldn't even bring themselves to leave immediately? Which leaves us with one final, deeply provocative thought. Think about when the neighbors finally broke into the farm on April 4th, and a crowd quickly gathered around the gruesome scene while the police started taking statements. We really have to ask, was the killer standing quietly right there in that crowd, watching the shock, casually answering questions, and perfectly blending in? It is an incredibly chilling thought, and one that still haunts investigators today. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the Hinterkaifeck mystery. Keep asking questions, keep analyzing the evidence, and I'll see